Werewolves seem to be everywhere, but what is the difference between a lycanthrope and a werewolf, I hear you asking? Well, there isn't much difference when we talk about the imagery, as they are usually referred to as being synonymous, and more or less they are if we're talking about the concept. However, lycanthropes have a much more interesting and human history than werewolves do. So grab a drink, grab a seat. I've got a story for you. Welcome back, wayward children, to my humble hovel. Let's get you back in touch with your roots, shall we? I am Castle, this is my tavern, and here we talk about stories, lore, and tales of yore. More specifically, a set of stories that has been handed down through my family over hundreds of years. They may differ from what you've heard in standard, but we are just here to enjoy stories with each other. So you're always welcome to leave whatever versions of these stories you've heard down in the kilt section below. So let's get into lycanthropy and its origins. Lycanthropy finds its origins, at least etymologically speaking, in its name from Greece, ancient Greece, and it's another one of Zeus's poor victims, and who knows if he deserved it or not, because it seems like Zeus is sort of indiscriminate in the way that he punishes. I mean, it's almost biblical. Though it seems that, while not the same in the case of Phineas, which you can hear about him here in the cards, Lycaon probably deserved very much what he got. Now, Lycaon was a king, and he was seen as being an impious king. He was seen as being very evil and self-serving, but he tried to trick Zeus into eating human flesh. And amongst most older deities, this is seen as a taboo. Any god that would eat human flesh, there are a plethora of old legends and myths that led to stories about what would happen to those gods, in the same way as it would talk about what would happen to people, which is where one of the origins of lycanthropy and werewolfism come from. And in the Americas, you even have stories of things like skinwalkers and the Wendigo. But getting back to Lycaon, he tried to trick Zeus into eating human flesh, but Zeus was not one to be fooled. And instead, he flooded all of Lycaon's kingdom and the surrounding kingdoms. Again, sounds oddly biblical. And then transformed Lycaon permanently into a wolf. And that's it. That is the origin of where that word comes from. But the reason why I say it is a more human history is because lycanthropy is more or less a real psychological aberrancy. It is something that has been recorded over time. Now, multiple of the werewolves we've spoken about were believed by doctors of the time, and even some doctors of today, to have lycanthropy, though we know that many werewolf charges were usually political or social moves by local governments. There were some people who were actual cannibals, who believed that they did indeed transform into wolves, and these people were not always killed. As a matter of fact, sometimes they were lobotomized or studied intently in mental asylums. There were several unnamed men in France and England and in Norway and Denmark in the 17 and 1800s who were believed to have eaten several women and children, and who earnestly believed that they transformed into wolves by night. and these men were lobotomized and studied over that course of time. But probably the most famous instance, and I don't necessarily believe that this is the most famous instance, but I say most famous because it's the highest acknowledgement, I think, of a person who believed themselves to be a wolf in human history. Now, we'll all remember Peter Stubb, the werewolf of Bedburg, but there's another famous Peter in history who was a werewolf, or a lycanthrope. And this was a young man named Peter, and he was called Peter the Wild Boy. And he was adopted, well, rather he was found wandering the woods on all fours, eating with his hands, and being nearly incapable of human speech. And he was adopted into the courts of King George I and King George II, where he lived as a pet until he died. Now, this was actually incredibly common amongst aristocracies between the 1400s and the 1700s to take people who had aberrant psychologies, who had mental illnesses, and treat them as pets or entertainment. So, believe it or not, it happened more often than we probably know of today. And Peter the Wild Boy is just one, and as I said, I believe the most famous instance where this happened. If you have not already joined the clan, I bid thee do so now, and you do so by engaging the subscribe button in Mortal Kombat. And when you have won, you will know, because the blood will drain from its body and it'll become a deathly grey, and conveniently located to its right is the victory bell, which you can ring to let all know of your victory over the subscribe button. And as a bonus, you'll also always know when I upload a video. And if you have won, it is traditional to raise your thumb and like the video as a extra celebration for your victory. I hope you have enjoyed and that you will join me next time we turn the page, my friends. And I bid thee check the Kilt section down below for all of my podcast purchasables and platforms. Everything I do is down there in the links. You might enjoy my podcast, a book and story podcast called Endless Epic, and you might enjoy some of my merchandise, which has a more of a little bit of a heathen sort of vibe to it. It's fun stuff. I enjoy it. I only sell stuff I enjoy. But I will have you remember to stay bloodthirsty, my friends, and remember, all hail the Black Dragons.